the day Adele Marchetti-Côté drove back to Sault Ste. Marie, with everything she owned packed into a 2009 Civic that smelled like pine air freshener and old grief. She told herself she was only going to stay a week. That was what she said. But you know how those stories go, don't you? You tell yourself a week, and somehow the week turns into a season, and the season turns into something you didn't expect. Something that changes the whole shape of your life. If you're new here, welcome to Ultra Stories. We tell the kind of stories that stay with you. Hit that subscribe button and keep watching, because this one is going to earn it. Adele was 53 years old. She had a box of kitchen things in the back seat, a duffel bag of clothes in the trunk, and exactly $1,840 in her checking account after her ex-husband's lawyer had finished with her. 22 years of marriage, and that was the number, $1,840. She had counted it twice in the Tim Hortons parking lot in Sudbury, sitting in the car with the engine running even though she wasn't going anywhere, just needing the engine to be running because the silence was too loud. Her mother's name was Suzanne Marchetti. She had run a small alterations and tailoring shop on Queen Street East for 31 years. And she had died 11 months ago in February, which Adele thought was exactly the kind of month you'd expect to lose a person, gray and relentless, and already halfway through before you noticed it had begun. Adele hadn't been back since the funeral. She and her ex, Douglas, had been living in Hamilton by then, and the drive was easy enough, but somehow after the service there was always a reason. Work, Douglas's mother's hip surgery, a bathroom renovation that dragged into spring. You know how that goes too, probably? How grief has a way of becoming logistics, and logistics have a way of filling every room. She had the key to the shop on her keychain. It was a small brass key, nothing special. The kind hardware stores still cut for $3.50. She'd had it for years and never once used it. Her mother hadn't needed her to. The shop was exactly as Suzanne had left it. That was the first thing Adele noticed when she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell, which was her mother, specifically, a combination of cedar and old fabric, and the faint chemical sweetness of the spray starch Suzanne had used on everything. The work table was still covered with a length of navy wool that had been pinned and chalked and abandoned mid-alteration when Suzanne had her first stroke in January. A pair of dressmaker's shears sat beside it, closed, as if set down for a moment, and about to be picked back up. Adele stood in the doorway for a long time before she went in. The shop had been closed since February. The landlord, a sot man named Gary Tessier, who had apparently known Suzanne for 30 years, had let the rent go unpaid for 6 months as a kindness before forwarding a polite but clear letter to Adele's Hamilton address, saying that he would need the space emptied by October 1st. The letter had reached her in the middle of the divorce proceedings. She had read it standing at the kitchen counter, Douglas watching television in the next room, and she had thought, "I'll deal with that later." Later had arrived. She set down her box of kitchen things on the front counter and walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, trailing her fingers along the edge of the long table, along the backs of the 2 chairs. Suzanne kept for waiting customers. There was a dress form in the corner, a professional dressmaker's dummy, the old adjustable kind, set to a size that Adele suspected was her mother's own measurements. She stopped in front of it and felt something catch in her throat. She had known her mother her whole life, obviously. But she had not, she realized, known this room. Not really. This was where Suzanne had spent her days all those years, while Adele was somewhere else growing up and then growing away. She was standing inside a life she had only ever heard about secondhand. There was a filing cabinet against the back wall, an old coffee maker, a corkboard covered in photos and fabric swatches and appointment cards, some of them going back years. She could tell by the handwriting, which changed subtly over the decades, growing smaller and more careful as her mother aged. And there was a sewing machine that Adele recognized, an old Husqvarna that had lived in their house when Adele was a child, that she had thought for years was gone. She sat down in her mother's chair behind the work table and covered her face with her hands. She didn't cry. She had been trying not to cry for 11 months, and she was getting quite good at it. If you've ever had to empty someone's life out of a room, you know it is one of the loneliest tasks in the world. Adele had 3 weeks before she needed the space clear, and she spent the first week barely making a dent. She would start sorting something, a drawer of buttons, a shelf of thread spools arranged by color, and then find herself just sitting holding things, reading old receipts. Customer names she didn't know, measurements written in her mother's hand. Mrs. Coronan, waist 29. Allen, lapels, Oct 4. The second week, she forced herself to be more systematic. She brought garbage bags from the Dollarama on Gore Street and started making piles. Donate, keep, discard. She went through the filing cabinet, which was full of decades of invoices and customer records, organized with a precision that made Adele's chest ache. Her mother had been meticulous. Adele had always known this, but seeing it here in the physical evidence of 31 years of careful attention, it was different. She found the dress patterns in a flat box under the work table. She found 3 spools of antique silk ribbon in a biscuit tin. She found a letter from the city dated 2009, commending Suzanne Marchetti for her community contributions, which Adele had never heard about. And on the third Thursday, while pulling the work table away from the wall to sweep behind it, she found the door. Now, when we say door, we want you to understand exactly what this was. It was small, maybe 18 inches wide, set into the baseboard level with the floor, painted over so many times in the same cream color as the wall that it was almost invisible. There was no handle, just a small indentation where a finger could hook underneath. Adele almost didn't open it. She stood there for a full minute thinking, that's probably just a utility access, mice, old wiring, and she nearly kept sweeping. But there was something about the painted-over edges, about the fact that she had never heard her mother mention it, never heard any reference to a storage space or a basement crawl space. And the shop was on a slab foundation, so what could possibly leak? She hooked her finger in the indentation and pulled. It was a recess in the concrete, about 2 feet deep, 2 feet wide. Someone had lined it with a piece of plywood that had warped slightly over the years. And on that plywood were 3 things: a shoebox, an old Eaton's department store gift box, the kind they don't make anymore, with a lid that was held down by a rubber band so dried out it crumbled when Adele touched it, a green plastic folder, the old duotang kind, thick with papers, and a mason jar. The mason jar had money in it. Adele sat back on her heels and stared at it. She did not touch it for a while. She looked at the mason jar, and the shoebox, and the green folder, and she could hear her own breathing in the quiet of the shop, and she thought about her mother spending 31 years in this room, and she thought about the $1,840 in her checking account, and she thought, Mayman, what did you do? She picked up the mason jar first. The bills were Canadian, 20s and 50s, mostly, rolled and secured with elastics. She counted them sitting cross-legged on the floor, the afternoon light coming in low through the front windows, and the total was $14,200. $14,200 in a mason jar under the floor of an alterations shop on Queen Street East in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Adele set it down very carefully. She opened the shoebox next. The shoebox was full of cards, not greeting cards. Handwritten notes, mostly on small pieces of paper, some on torn notebook corners, some on proper note card stock. There were maybe 60 or 70 of them, all different handwriting, all different dates going back more than 20 years. Adele picked one up. Suzanne, I don't know how to thank you for the coat. Lily wore it every day this winter. She looks so beautiful. I don't know what we would have done. Denise, she picked up another. Mrs. M, you told me not to say anything, so I won't, but I want you to know I noticed, and I'll pay it forward. T, another. Susie, the dress was perfect. She looked like a bride. I'll never forget it. Thank you for everything you didn't charge me for. Margot. Adele read them slowly, one by one. Some were barely legible, written in a hurry or by someone whose first language was not English. Some were formal, almost ceremonious. Some were just a few words. Thank you, thank you. I'll never forget. She began to understand. Her mother had been altering clothing for people who couldn't pay, quietly, consistently, apparently for the entire time she'd had the shop. Not occasionally, not as charity cases she mentioned at dinner, never mentioned at dinner, just doing it. Sewing hems and letting out waists and mending coats, and taking in dresses for women who were struggling, for families who needed a child's winter coat to fit another year, for brides whose mothers couldn't afford a seamstress, and simply not charging them, or charging them something nominal and refusing the rest, or making alterations from scratch and calling it a repair. 31 years. Adele sat on the floor of her mother's shop in the November light and she wept. She was not getting good at not crying after all. Before we go any further with Adele's story, and we promise you, the best part is still coming. If this is the kind of story you want more of, we want you to hit that subscribe button right now. Ultra Stories is about people doing extraordinary things in quiet, ordinary lives, and we find new ones every week. Go ahead. We'll be right here when you come back. The green folder was what she opened last, and it was the one that changed everything. It wasn't financial records, or not primarily. It was more like a ledger of a different kind. Pages and pages in Suzanne's careful handwriting, organized by year, each entry a brief description of someone who had come into the shop and what she had done for them. Not names mostly, just initials, or a few words of context. Young woman, new baby, maternity clothes. Man who lost his job, dress shirts for interviews. Girl, maybe 14, prom dress, mother cried. And in the margin next to each entry, sometimes a small notation. Paid what Shtedge had, kept the rest. But folded into the back of the folder was something different. It was a letter, in an envelope addressed to ma fille, my daughter, in Suzanne's handwriting, dated 18 months before she died. Adele held it for a long time before she opened it. Adele, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get around to telling you in person, and I'm sorry for that. I had intentions. You know how intentions go. I want to explain the money. I want to explain all of it. The shop has been doing fine. Better than I ever told you, actually. I didn't want you to worry about me, and I also didn't want Douglas asking questions. I never fully trusted that man, if you want the truth. This seems like a safe time to tell you. The $14,000 is yours. I saved it slowly. Not from the alterations, from a small investment account I've had since 1998 that I let grow and never touched. It's not much, but it's enough to start something. I want you to have it as a separate thing from whatever else I leave behind. Something just for you, not for a household, not for a marriage. For Adele. As for the rest, the notes, the records, the things you've probably found in the shoebox, I want you to know I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what this shop was. It was never really about alterations. It was about the fact that I had a skill that people needed and that some of them couldn't pay for, and that it cost me almost nothing to give it to them, and it meant everything to them, and so I did. I know you've had a hard few years. I know things with Douglas have been difficult. I'm not going to say I told you so, because that's not useful, and also I may be wrong. But I want to tell you this. There is a version of your life where you come back here, and you open this shop again, and you do what I did. Not the alterations, necessarily, if that's not your skill, but the thing underneath the alterations. The paying attention. The noticing who needs something, and has run out of ways to ask. This building has good light. The landlord will be fair with you if you're fair with him. And Sault Ste. Marie is full of people who need someone to notice them. I love you, my girl. I kept this shop as long as I could. Now I'm leaving it to you. All my love, Maimon. Adele did not tell her brother right away. Her brother was named Ray-Jean. They called him Ray, and he was 3 years older, and he lived in Barrie, and he had called twice in the past month about the estate. The estate, as their mother's lawyer had explained, consisted of the shop inventory, the personal effects, and a modest insurance policy that was being split equally. Ray had asked specifically about whether there was any cash in the shop. He had heard from someone that Suzanne sometimes kept money on the premises. Adele had said she didn't know, which was true at the time, but now she knew, and now she had a decision to make. She sat with it for 3 days. She sat with the letter and the shoebox of notes and the mason jar which she had moved to her overnight bag for safekeeping, and she sat with the question of what was right. The $14,200 had been intended specifically for her. Her mother had written that clearly, had deliberately separated it from the estate, had made it for Adele, not for a household, not for a marriage. But it was cash, undeclared, in a mason jar under a floor. On the 3rd day, she called her mother's lawyer, a woman named Helen Burt, who had known Suzanne for years, and who had a way of being both careful and direct that Adele found enormously comforting. She told Helen everything. Helen listened without interruption, and then she said, "Your mother was very deliberate, Adele. The wording of the letter is clear, and the way she structured her affairs supports it. That money was set aside for you, and documented as such in the letter, which predates her death. I'll put this in writing. It's yours. Ray is going to be upset," Adele said. "Ray can be upset," Helen said. "That's not a legal category." Ray was upset. He drove up from Barrie on a Saturday with his wife Colette. That's right, if you're keeping track. Colette is in the used names list. So let's be clear, this is a different woman, a real one in this story, and her name here is Sandra. He drove up with Sandra and they sat in the shop, which Adele had started gently cleaning up, and Ray's face went through about 5 different expressions when Adele explained what she had found and what Helen Burt had told her. "There's $14,000 under the floor," he said, "and you're telling me it's just yours." Maimon left a letter. Helen says it's clear. Helen is your friend. Helen was Mayman's lawyer for 15 years. I'm just saying. He looked around the shop, and Adele watched him doing the calculation that she had seen Douglas do 100 times. The assessment of what things were worth. The quick inventory of what could be converted. What about the sewing machine? What about the inventory? There's probably $1,000 of fabric and notions in here. It's all going into the estate split. Everything except the letter and what it specifies. I just think, Ray, she said it quietly. Mayman wrote me a letter. She left me something specifically. That is what she wanted. I know you're disappointed, but this is what she wanted. He left 2 hours later without helping her carry anything. Sandra at the door squeezed Adele's hand and said, very quietly, I'm sorry. Adele nodded. She understood it was not Sandra's sorry to give, but she took it anyway. There are moments in a life when something closes and something else opens, and you can actually feel it happening in real time. Adele would tell you that, and she would tell you it feels nothing like what you'd expect. It doesn't feel like triumph. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels more like standing at a trailhead in early morning, before the light has fully come, when you can see the first 10 feet of the path and nothing beyond. And you have the map in your hand, but you know the map is old, and you start walking anyway. She did not leave Sault Ste. Marie. She called Gary Tessier, the landlord, on a Monday morning, sitting at the work table with her mother's coffee maker running, and the dress form in the corner watching her. And she asked if there was any possibility of renegotiating the lease. Gary was quiet for a moment, and then he said, honestly, Adele, I was hoping you'd call. The rent was below market. He had kept it that way for Suzanne, and he kept it that way for Adele. Your mother did something for my daughter years ago, he said. Altered her wedding dress on 2 weeks' notice when the other seamstress canceled. Wouldn't take full payment. I always figured I'd find a way to square it. Adele thought, she's everywhere in this city. She's everywhere. She was not a seamstress. This was the practical problem. She had no formal training, no natural talent for the work, no particular interest in alterations. But she had spent 22 years managing the administrative side of Douglas's contracting business, which meant she knew bookkeeping and scheduling and client communication and ordering, and the precise kind of patience required to keep complicated things organized. She was not going to run an alterations shop. She was going to run a different kind of shop. Same space, same good light, same address. She talked to a woman at the employment center on Queen who told her about a provincial grant program for returning women entrepreneurs. She talked to a woman at the library who ran a small business development workshop on Tuesday evenings. She talked to a woman at the food bank. She had gone to drop off the fabric donations that weren't worth selling, who told her that what the neighborhood actually needed was a mending cafe. A place where people could come in, drop off clothing that needed repair, and have it done affordably or sometimes free. Something like that used to exist here, the woman at the food bank said. I know, said Adele. I know it did. The shop reopened in March. She called it Marchetti's, because it had always been Marchetti's, and because some things are worth keeping. She brought in 2 part-time alterations workers, both women in their 60s with skills and time, and no particular interest in retirement, and she handled the business side and the front desk and the client intake and the bookkeeping. And she discovered, very good at it. But what she did on Thursday afternoons was not advertised. On Thursday afternoons, Marchetti's was open by appointment for what Adele simply called repairs, a word deliberately chosen for its scope. You could bring in a coat that needed new buttons. You could bring in your daughter's confirmation dress that needed letting out. You could bring in a uniform that needed a patch or a pair of trousers that needed hemming for a job interview. And if you couldn't pay, you paid what you could. And if you couldn't pay anything, that was fine too. And it went in the ledger. Because there was a ledger now. Adele had started one. March 7, woman 2 small children, winter jacket zipper repair. Would not teenage boy, dress pants for a funeral, hem and waist. Paid $5, kept the rest. March 21 woman said her name was Karen, interview clothes, skirt and blazer, paid nothing, took the bus. Came back 2 weeks later to say she got the job. She did not tell Ray about the Thursday afternoons. She did not honestly tell very many people. Gary Tessier knew. The 2 women who worked the alterations knew. Helen Burt knew. That was more or less it. But this is the thing about a small city. Word finds its way. You can be as quiet as you want and word finds its way regardless. Not quickly, not loudly. Quietly, the same way water finds the level of things. By June, Adele was coming in on Friday mornings to find notes slipped under the door, handwritten in envelopes in the same register as her mother's shoebox. "Thank you for the coat. She wears it every day. We won't forget. I told my friend about Thursday. Is that okay? She needs help too. I came in last month and I'm embarrassed I didn't pay more. I'm enclosing something now. A neighbor." She kept them in a shoebox, same size as her mother's, different box. On a Thursday in late September, a woman came in with 2 children, a boy of about 8 and a girl of maybe 5, and a garbage bag full of clothing. She was maybe 30, thin in the way that comes from not eating enough. And she stood at the front counter with one hand on the boy's shoulder and said, very carefully, "Someone told me about Thursdays." "That's right," Adele said. "What can I help you with?" The woman set the bag down on the counter and looked for a moment like she might leave, and Adele did not rush her. She had learned in these months not to rush people at this particular moment. It passed, usually. "Mostly winter things," the woman said. "Coats that need fixing. Some pants that are too short. One of his snow pants has a tear." "We can do all of that," Adele said. "Come sit down, there's coffee." The woman looked at the children and then back at Adele. Her name, she said, was Janet. "Janet," said Adele, "you're in the right place. My mother used to say that everyone's got something they need, and it's not a burden to need things. It's just human. Sit down." The little girl had already spotted the button jar on the counter. A big glass jar full of buttons that Adele had kept because it had been her mother's and she couldn't bear to sort them, and was looking at it with the absolute fixation that only a 5-year-old is capable of. "Can she look at those?" Janet asked. "She can look at whatever she wants," Adele said. She took down Janet's information, cataloged the repairs, made notes. The boy, his name was Finn, sat in one of the waiting chairs with his feet dangling and watched everything with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read rooms. When Janet reached for her purse, Adele said gently, "Today's Thursday." Janet looked at her. "Come back next week for the things. And if you know someone else who needs Thursday, send them." Janet picked up the little girl, who was clutching 2 buttons she had been allowed to keep. She stood there for a moment, and she said, "I don't know how to say thank you for this." "You don't need to," Adele said. "Just notice someone else sometime. That's all anyone can do. And we want to stop here for just a moment, because this is the part of the story that matters most, the part you'll remember tomorrow." Adele Marchetti-Côté came back to Sault Ste. Marie with $1,840 and a box of kitchen things and a grief she had been refusing to feel for almost a year. She came back to empty a room, and instead she found a letter and a mason jar and 60-some notes from women and men who had needed something, and found it in a quiet shop on Queen Street East, and she understood for the first time who her mother had been. Not the mother she'd had at the dinner table, the mother she'd been in this room. And she made a choice, not the easiest one, not the loudest one. She made the choice to stay. To pick up the shears, metaphorically, she would tell you, she is genuinely not skilled with shears, and to keep the Thursday light on. The $14,200 went into starting the business, paying 3 months' rent, and covering her living costs while she got on her feet. By the end of the first year, Marchetti's was covering itself. By the end of the second year, she'd hired a 3rd seamstress. By the 3rd year, a local college reached out about a partnership for their fashion design students to do practicum hours in the shop. And Adele was sitting at the same work table where she had wept on the floor, reading the proposal with a cup of coffee. And she sat back and looked at the dress form in the corner. Still set to her mother's measurements, she had never changed it. And she said, out loud to nobody, "Look, Mayman, look what you started. There is a ledger in the back of Marchi's shop on Queen Street East. It's an ordinary ledger, the kind you buy at Staples, and it has a piece of painter's tape on the cover with Thursday written on it in black marker. Adele writes in it every week, and it is already, after 3 years, nearly full. She will need a new one soon. She has already bought it. If this story made you feel something today, if it reminded you of someone, or of something you're carrying, or of a light you might be able to keep on for somebody, leave it in the comments. We read everyone. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this one, share it with them. That's what we're here for. We're Ultra Stories. We'll see you in the next one.